Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1467. Hey, if you want to download this Excel file so you could follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we got a great video here where we're going to compare COUNTIFS function and SUMPRODUCT to create a complex counting formula where we have to deal with empty cells and logical tests and or logical tests. Now, our goal of our formula is simply to count open projects by day and project code. So for any single cell in our formula report, I need to figure out from this data set all of the open projects on this day for this particular project code. Now, for each cell where we're counting, this is the full logical test. I'm going to have to see if the start date is less than or equal to the date. So for right here, this cell, I need to check all of the start dates to see if it's less than or equal to this particular day. And this is an and logical test, so both will have to be true. And the start date cannot be an empty cell because we have some transactions where both the start and end date are empty. Now, you might think that we could just check the whole column less than or equal to this, but something interesting happens. If I say, is this start date right here less than or equal to this date? Well, I better get true here. Well, what happens if instead of this being a date, this is an empty cell? I would want a false, but that construction will give me a true. And the reason why is an empty cell, when it's evaluated, evaluates to 0. So if I hit F9, I see a 0. I'm going to click Escape and Delete. So we're going to do both of these together. Start date less than or equal to the date, and start date cannot be an empty cell. Then the third and test will be, is the end date from this column right here less than or equal to the date? That'll be that. Or is the end date an empty cell? Now, if we click in the project number column and go to the bottom, that condition is going to become important because we want to count this record right here as an open record. Because if we're counting open records on 9/25, well, this has a start date of 9/25 and no end date. That means it's open. So in some cases, we'll have an actual end date, and we want to analyze that to say, is this end date greater than or equal to the date up there, or is the date empty? Because that will count also. Now, let's Control up arrow. So the third part of our and logical test will involve an or logical test. And then the fourth part is and the project code from our column headers has to equal project code for whatever transaction it is. Now we're going to see SUMPRODUCT and COUNTIFS. And the way each formula is created is totally different. So it'll be useful to compare and contrast how we create these logical tests. And this is a pretty complex logical test in the two functions. We're going to start with SUMPRODUCT. Now, equals SUMPRODUCT. The way SUMPRODUCT works is we have to create an array of ones and zeros that represent trues and falses for each record. And since we have 4 logical tests, we're going to create 1, 2, 3, 4 arrays of zeros and ones. And then SUMPRODUCT will multiply all of them. And only when we get a 1, a 1, a 1, and a 1, a true for each one of our and logical tests, will SUMPRODUCT get a resulting 1 for that particular transaction. Now we're going to check for the first array whether the start date column is less than or equal to this. But I got to show you a cool trick, Escape. Now, I already converted this to a table. I used Control-T, and then I gave it a name up in Table Tools Design. So, of course, if I were to add one of these table columns in my formula, and I'm just going to do this equals, and the cool trick I want to leverage for this formula, because we're going to be selecting a lot of columns, is you use your downward pointing black arrow at the top of a table, and it puts the whole column in. The problem is That's table formula nomenclature. And when you go to lock table formula nomenclature, it's incredibly complicated. Now, I do it sometimes and know how to do it, but man, I don't want to mess with that at all. So watch this. Here's the trick. I converted it to table so I could do that little trick at the top right here. But now I'm going to go to File, Options, and in Formulas, uncheck Use Table Names in Formulas. Click OK. Now I can simply use this trick, boom, and it gives me the cell references. Hey, also, the great thing about this is we're allowed to use cell references and the same dynamic nature of the table, meaning we can add new records or delete records, and all the formulas will update. All right, equals SUMPRODUCT, our first array. I'm going to highlight Start. There it is. I love it. Cell references, F4 to lock it. I'm going to ask the question, are any of you less than or equal to the date at the head of the row? Now, I'm going to copy this formula across the columns, and I need it locked on that date. Then I need to copy it down and have that cell reference move as a relative cell reference. So I need to hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Lock the column reference, lock this way, but not the 29, the row reference. It's allowed to move relatively as I copy down. Now, the problem with SUMPRODUCT is that array right there will give me a bunch of trues and falses. Now, I can't highlight this and hit the F9 key to evaluate it because it has too many characters. So for just a moment, I'm going to backspace on these zeros. Now I can click and hit F9, trues and falses. Remember, that's our logical test. But SUMPRODUCT doesn't understand trues and falses. Control Z, I'm going to make sure to put those zeros back. I need to convert them to ones and zeros. The fastest way to do that is with double negative. Although you can use any math operation, almost always that's the most efficient way to do it. So we have our first array. And if you evaluate that, I should have done this. If I take this F9, we can see we get ones. In our case, they're all ones. The second, third, and fourth conditions will eliminate some of those. But ones and zeros will always be in the resultant array, and SUMPRODUCT has no problem with those. Control Z, 0, 0. Now, comma, the second logical test. I need to check if any records have cells that are not empty. There's a bunch of ways we can do this. I'm going to do is blank. Now, you got to read this carefully. It definitely checks for empty cells. So I'm going to hit Tab, click on the top of Start Date, F4 to lock it, close parentheses. Well, that gives me a true if it's blank. I want a false if it's blank, so I'm going to use the not function, which will convert trues to falses and falses to true. We have the same problem with trues and falses, so we put our double negative. Now we have array 1 and array 2. Those are our first two logical tests. Now, comma. Now, array 3 is going to be the hard one because we have an OR logical test. Now, if we create an array here and a second array here, because we're never going to have a date that has a date and has an empty cell, we can use the math operator plus. If I add an array of ones and zeros with another array of ones and zeros, 0 and a 1 here will equal 1. Or if I get a 0 and a 1 here, it'll equal 1. And when it's 0, 0, it will equal 0. So I'm going to open parentheses, end date, F4 to lock it. Are any of you end dates greater than or equal to the date over here? F4 1, 2, 3 times. That's our first array of trues and falses. And now I do the plus operator. And our second array is blank. Highlight all of the end dates. F4 to lock it. Close parentheses. I don't need to do double negative here because any math operator will convert trues and falses to ones and zeros. So that will be our OR logical test. Comma, array 4, I need to check project code. F4, are any of you equal to whatever the column header is? Now notice As I copy down, I need it locked on H28. But as I copy to the side, I need to move to HIJK. So I'm going to hit the F4 key just twice to lock the row, but not the column. Now, this is also going to need double negative open parentheses, and at the end, close parentheses, close parentheses. Now, just to check, I have one logical test and another logical test and another one and another one. When I Control Enter, copy it to the side, double click and send it down. You see how there was a little momentary stall there? These are crunching over a lot of cells doing direct array operations. So even though I didn't time these formulas, I'm pretty sure that this formula, SUMPRODUCT, will take a lot longer to calculate than COUNTIFS. I'm checking all of the cell references. It looks like they're all working, except for this. Now, I actually have this set up. The last video, we saw how to do these two formulas. But I went ahead and created a dynamic date column here that looks at the start of the month. And then I'm not going to go through this formula, but rows with a dynamic expandable range. This is a number incrementer that will count 2, 3, 4, 5 as I count down. So I'm asking when the row is bigger than the days in the month, then please show nothing. Otherwise, please look above and add one. I copied that down. So down here, I want to shut this formula off. Well, notice if it's an if formula running a logical test, since it got a true there, that's what's in the cell here. So anytime there is double quote, which is a zero-length text string, I want to turn this formula off. So F2, right at the beginning, if. And I'm going to click cell G29 and hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times to lock the column, but not the row. When you're equal to double quote, comma. When that comes out true, that means I'm down at the bottom. Then what do I want for value of true? I want to show nothing with our double quote. That's the syntax to show nothing. Technically, it's a zero-length text string. Then if it comes out false, that means everywhere up here, I want to run that formula. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Copy it to the side, double click and send it down. I can come over here and I'm checking all the cell references are working. Now the nice thing about this setup is I can come here and type any date, 5/5/2015, Control Enter. Instantly, I see for any one of our project codes the number of projects that were open on that particular day. All right, so that's the SUMPRODUCT formula. Let's go over and see how to do it with COUNTIFS. Now, I'm going to hide these columns. I'm going to click from F all the way to L. Right-click, hide. Now, the crazy thing is we are going to see how to do it with COUNTIFS. And then we're going to see an absolutely outrageous formula that combines SUMPRODUCT and COUNTIFS. All right, so COUNTIFS. We're doing an OR logical test as part of the formula. COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, and all these functions, they do AND logical tests. And so when we put a criteria range 1, criteria range 2, criteria 2, they are going to combine to do an AND logical test. The only way you can do an OR logical test with COUNTIFS is if for the criteria you can stack your criteria one on top of each other in the cells. So the way we're going to do this formula here is we're going to actually have two different COUNTIFS and add them. Now, the reason we can do that is because our OR logical test is on a single column where we can never get a double count. We can never have both empty cell and a date there. All right, first criteria range, that's the start date, F4 to lock it, comma. The criteria in double quotes, we have to put less than or equal to, and double quotes, ampersand to join it with the date criteria. I'm going to hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Now notice already we can see a difference. With sum products and direct array operations, we do not put the comparative operator in double quotes and join it. It's all sitting right next to each other. For sum product over there, we had the range, comparative operator, and date. But in COUNTIFS, we have to separate it. That's a whole separate thing than the column that we're looking through to find a match for this criteria. All right, the next condition, comma. We highlight start date for a second time, F4, comma, to get to criteria 2. Now, we're interested in not empty because we need to exclude that. In COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, if you put the not operator, less than, greater than, in double quotes, that gets a true for not empty. If you use an equal sign in double quotes, that gets a true for empty. So because I'm looking for not empty, double quote, less than, greater than, and double quote. Now, actually, I have a bunch of reference videos up here. I've already hidden these columns. But if you look up here, I have some very interesting video references on the difference between empty cells, zero-length text strings, and the word blank. And then I also have some interesting videos on and or logical tests. All right, so that's our second criteria, comma. We have the or logical test, but I'm going to leave that for the fourth one. This one, we simply need to check for project code. So I highlight project code, F4, comma, column header, F4, 1, 2 times, comma. Now, criteria 4. Remember, we need to look through the end date column. So I'm going to click on that, F4 to lock it, comma. And we have or. If we could put the or in a cell, either stacked on top or in off to the side, we just highlight those two cells, and it would force COUNTIFS to do a function argument array operation. But since we're never going to have a double count, we can simply put the first or condition, double quotes, greater than or equal to n double quotes, and join it to our date. F4 to lock it, 1, 2, 3 times. I lock the column, but not the row. Now I can close parentheses and highlight the entire formula and copy it. Now we use the plus symbol. Plus is often used in or logical test. Control V, and we simply have to change. If I move the screen tip, highlight this. I need a true when the cell is empty. So in double quotes, equal sign. That will work in COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, getting a true for an empty cell. All right, and that formula will work. Control Enter. Copy it to the side. Double click and send it down. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2. I'm just verifying that all of the cell references are working. Now we need to do the same thing here. We happen to have 31 days in this month. Come up to the top, F2, if, date, locked, 1, 2, 3 times with the F4 key. If you are equal to double quote, that comes out true, comma, the value of true. Please show nothing by using a double quote, double quote. Otherwise, the value, if false, will be our whole formula. Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. And there we go. We can unhide by making sure that our highlighted columns have the hidden columns there. Right click, unhide. And watch this. We can simply come up here and change this to anything. Actually, the dates, I put the min and max dates over here. So let's try to/any date in February 2014. And instantly, everything updates. We're getting all of the same formulas, all of the same answers. Now, one thing that is useful, if you're creating two different formulas like this and you want to verify, because I don't trust my eyes to see all this, but if you want to verify, you can come off to the side and we'll do a formula here. Equals, and I'm going to check. Is this 2-1 house equal to this other one, F21 house. Tab. And I'm going to copy it over 5 times. And then I'm going to copy it down. I still don't trust my eyes, so now I come up and type equals COUNTIFS, and I'm going to count this entire range. Control Shift right arrow, down arrow, Control backspace to jump back to the active cell, comma, and I don't even have to capitalize it because it'll capitalize it for me. Type in false, Control Enter. So I'm getting 0. There's that formula. All right, now here's the crazy part. We were talking about using COUNTIFS to do an OR logical test. But the only way you can do that is if you can get your OR criteria, both this one and down here, this one, into a cell stacked up on top of each other. And of course, both of these conditions are analyzed in the same column. So if we can do that, we can actually have a significantly shorter formula. It's not necessarily going to calculate any faster, but it's going to be a lot shorter when typing it out. Not only that, but we're going to have to simulate those two OR conditions over there into cells. Well, the first one, I'm going to say equal sign, and then in double quotes, I'm going to say greater than or equal to end double quotes, and I'm going to join it to the date. Now, formulas never see number formatting. So when I Control Enter, it's looking at the underlying serial number, which is perfectly fine. Notice this is already annoying if you had your report and you couldn't have stuff off to the side. Now, we don't have to worry about this because our formula will be turned off from the empty cell right there. And then guess what? What was our second condition for an empty cell? Well, it was an equal sign. Well, I can't type an equal sign and copy it down, but I can put a lead apostrophe, and then that tells Excel, no, this is just text. Now I can double click and send it down. Now look at that. The criteria, the OR condition criteria, is changing for each row in our table. Now we have a shorter formula. Now I'm going to cheat. Watch this. Since it was exactly the same, highlight the first COUNTIFS, Control C, escape. Come over here, equal sign, Control V, and I'm going to use my screen tip here to highlight. And now instead of that, oh, and I can't see it because this is hanging over. AB, it's actually AB 29. 29. Now you can see it's sort of highlighted there, but I need to lock it. So I'm going to click on the screen tip and lock it with the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Column needs to be locked, but not the row. Now what does this do? We put more than one item into criteria 4. That means because there's 2 items here, we're telling COUNTIFS to spit out 2 answers. If I enter this, it can't display 2 answers in a cell, of course. So when I F2, I can F9 to prove that I'm getting 2 answers. And I am. Control Z. If we copy this to the side and down and over, the first ones, because it's the first date, didn't get any double numbers that weren't 0. So F2, F9, there I'm getting 6 and 0. So it's working. Now all we need to do for those 2 OR logical test results is to add them. So I come up here, F2, and I could use sum function and then use Control-Shift-Enter to enter it as an array. But I'm going to use the SUMPRODUCT function because another great use for SUMPRODUCT is if you have an array calculation spitting out multiple answers like we do, you just use the first argument, which automatically knows how to calculate array operations. Then, because we're only using one argument, it doesn't do product. It just does sum, just adds them. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Copy it to the side, double click and send it down. We get exactly the same answers. We could come over here and do our same trick. Highlight this. Control C, Control V. I'm going to highlight all these trues and watch this. F2 at the top. I'm going to move that one right there. That should be that house right there. And this one Should be the house right there. I moved them with my mouse. Now I can populate this edited formula throughout the highlighted range with Control-Enter. Looks like we have a problem. So down here we're getting falses. Oh, it is giving me something here, and I don't want this. I'm glad I did that little test off to the side. Now I can come up here, F2, and we'll simply do the same logical test. Is this date equal to double quote? If it is, comma, then value if true, double quote, double quote. Otherwise, comma, please run our formula. Close parentheses, Control-Enter, copy it to the side, double-click, and send it down. And now we'll get our trues over here. And that is a wild formula. Look at that. So we can use SUMPRODUCT and COUNTIFS, where COUNTIFS is doing an OR logical test. Because we constructed the OR logical test that's acting on the same column off to the side, we can do two COUNTIFS, and we were allowed to add them because there is never a chance that there's any double counting. By the way, up at the top here, I have a great video from my statistical class about OR events or OR logical tests. And in there, I show you how to use COUNTIFS and subtract the double counting. But there's a bunch of cool examples there. So we saw SUMPRODUCT, COUNTIFS, and of course, we saw our SUMPRODUCT. Now, again, I didn't test them, but I can already tell visually and from testing many formulas in the past that this one's going to take longer to calculate. I'm curious in the comment, let everyone know which one you like or if you have some other way to do this. All right, that was a lot of fun with counting with complex criteria with COUNTIFS or SUMPRODUCT. If you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos from Excel is Fun. All right, we'll see you next video.